welcome to everyone who's attending. I'm Michael Williams at Levelset. I'm the manager of financial services, and we have a really good webinar today talking about the opportunity costs of poor project cash flow, which anyone in the industry is more than familiar with. But I'm really excited because we have two great panelists. We have John Killingsworth, who's an assistant professor at Colorado State University, and he teaches construction finance. He's a member of the CFMA National Benchmarker Committee and works with the committee each year to analyze trends in CFMA benchmark data. Then we have Bruce Orr, who's the founder and chief data scientist of Pronovus Analytics. And Pronovus specifically focuses on the construction industry and is a leading provider of construction data analytics, cloud-based data warehousing, and all things business intelligence related. So clearly we have a lot of muscle on the webinar, and I won't take up any more of their time. So John, Bruce, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, I guess this is back to me. So for any of you who are unfamiliar with Levelset, we help contractors get paid. So when we're talking about cash flow, a huge component of the cash flow pain in construction is the slow payment that can often take place in construction. We help you get paid. We help you get paid faster and try and remove the stresses of construction payment.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for allowing us to be part of this webinar. I'm very excited. Who is Pronovus? So, Pronovus is a cloud-based data warehouse technology. We only focus on construction data. Just like Levelset helps you get paid, Pronovus helps you analyze the information to show where inefficiencies are, to show you, how you might be able to sharpen the saw, if you will, and work smarter and not harder using intelligent data. So I'm excited to talk about, the cost of poor, cash flow. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Bruce and Michael. Appreciate you letting us come in and talk a little bit about this topic today. This is something that I'm very passionate about in terms of my research and teaching, because I feel like this is one of our biggest weaknesses in the industry is managing these cash flows, managing these projects, and in my program, I'm training construction managers. So I'm training the young men and women that will go out and become superintendents and project managers and manage projects. And it's a constant push to get them to focus on the construction financial piece. So I'm excited to be engaged with Levelset and be able to offer some instruction in this. I provide industry-based workshops, something I do sort of on the side because I'm really engaged in this. So I do training programs with industry on fundamentals of construction finance and project level cash flow management. So what we're discussing here is like a 30-40 minute summary of just that project level cash flow training. And so it's really just almost, if you will, a teaser, but we really do want to emphasize some of the major principles that are in that program. And I've been working with Bruce for a number of years, and when we got introduced, I started getting more into analytics and using analytics in that training. And so Bruce has been instrumental in really helping me sort of advance the ability to manage cash flows and to show and train project managers how to do that more efficiently.
So John, I have a question for you before we get into this. As you said, we've been working together for a number of years, and this particular webinar, will this be you speaking to us as a professor. So is this going to be highly academic, or are you going to show, the real business application of job level cash flow?
Yeah. Nobody ever accused me of using big words. So I'm really trying to make this very practical. Notice I use the word practical instead of pragmatic, right? So so trying to make this usable information, right? So very practical information. Hopefully it's not too academic. Even my research is very grounded, if you will, in terms of applicability to industry. So I'm very cognizant of that. So hopefully it's doesn't sound or come across academic, but some of the language just right in analytics and so forth, just naturally is a bit academic. So please, if anybody's got questions, we wanna hear what your questions are and the challenges you're facing of implementing the things that we're sharing today.
Yeah, I did want to jump in and mention I forgot to encourage the audience to ask questions. I'll be monitoring both the Q&A section and the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, you can click Q&A or chat and ask questions at any time.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Okay, so fundamentally, right? Let's think about cash flow from the very sort of basic contractual level, and you can see on the top far left, right, working left to right. If you look at this sort of in terms of a Gantt chart, I suppose. And so we do work, right? And so maybe that period represents a month of work. We get to the end of that month and we invoice the owner, right? And contractually then the owner is given a 30-day period to make the payment, and then that payment's received after that. Meanwhile, we're still continuing to do work, right? So if everything follows contractually to the way it should be, we're 60 days or so, 65 days in from the time we start work to the time we receive our very first payment, right? And then that cycle is constant. We understand in construction that's part of, right, the cost of doing business. I hear that quite a bit, to have to carry that, and it is. And general contractors have quite an expense carrying that load, and some of that gets passed to, a lot of it gets passed down to the subcontractor base as well. So we all are very familiar with how things go, that construction cash flow cycle throughout the project, right? And we're closing out a project and we're still waiting for money, even though we've completed our scope.
And so John, I just wanted to ask, this is the way it should be? Am I right? This is what we're used to when things are clicking. You do the work, 30 days, you bill, you get paid, and this is the way it should be.
Right. Yeah. Contractually, this is what we expect, right? How it should go.
Okay.
But what's the reality, right? The reality is we do the work, and then our project manager delays sending off the invoice, and now, right, the 30-day clock is ticking, and we're a week or two or whatever into that next cycle before the invoice even goes out. And then if our owner customer is paying in that 30-day cycle, we still now have extended, right, that cash flow cycle for receiving the payment because of our own sort of inconsistency in invoicing or delay in invoicing. So that's a critical thing. If anything, right, take away, let's make sure that our invoicing is happening on time. And then the next scenario, right, Bruce, is we invoice on time, but the owner pays more like 45, 50 days. And when I look at the industry average in terms of days days in accounts receivable, it's actually upwards of 50 days for the industry average. And then it gets worse for the subcontractor base because there's always that lag, right? There's the pay when pay lag as well. So subcontractors are carrying that burden for a longer period of time.
So let me ask you a question. You know what the average is because of the work you do on the CFMA benchmarker. Is that where you're getting that information from?
Right, that's exactly right. So I serve on the national CFMA benchmarker committee. So so I'm able to see sort of the raw data when it comes in. And so I do analysis on that. So in the last few years, we've gotten some great response on that, and I'd love to see it continue to get bigger. But yeah, last year we had like close to 1,500 contractors participate that, and so it really gives us some meaningful data. And this is the trend that I'm seeing in terms of days accounts receivable.
What was the average again?
For this ratio?
Yeah,
it's upwards of 50 days. A little bit longer for subcontractors, a little bit shorter for CMs, right about the average for GCs.
Okay. We believe that based on the previous slide, 30 days is what typically you're contractually you're at.
Right, 30 days, right? We expect that in our model, in our estimating and so on and so forth, in our fee structure, we expect 30 days.
Got it.
But the reality is we're closer to 55 days.
Got it.
So, right. So, and then imagine that aggregate, if we're delaying the payment and the owner is taking too long to actually pay, now we're aggravating that pay cycle even more.
Got it.
So let's switch over to the Pronovos.
Got it.
Right. Okay. So here's a project that Bruce helped me pull into Pronovos, and I was cash flowing this project for a client and trying to do some analysis for them. And initially, like outside of the Pronovos app, I was working in Excel. It's very sort of time consuming. In reality, like you look at this spreadsheet and you see, right, all of these numbers, and until you actually start to analyze them and so forth, what does it tell you? It's just this massive spreadsheet of numbers. And even when you do start to calculate some sort of basic descriptive statistics or whatever, so some details, it's still just numbers and numbers and numbers. So the challenge in this case, right, is seeing really what's happening. And so this is the powerful thing. This is what gets me really excited about visual analytics, and so not to inflate your ego too much here, Bruce, but I love what you're doing because it helps us, right, operations see things very quickly and see the data in a quick way so that we can see trends and be able to make managerial decisions based on those trends.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, let's take a look at this same data graphically, right? So here's the project, how it proceeded over time. You can see we have an August 2019. These dates have been altered to protect to be able to make it public. The contractor asked me to to change some dates and that kind of thing, but really the dollar figures are exactly accurate to the way they were. Mm-hmm. So we have this project that started in August of 2019 and proceeded through, we'll pretend that May of 2022 is in the past. And you can see the red line is indicative of my job costs. So we get that monthly job cost report, and you can see, right, it follows that standard sort of S curve, a little bit slow in the beginning and then escalates and then slows down at the end. That's a typical trend in any construction project.
Just let me ask a question real quick about the S curve. When you have an S curve that you're looking at regarding job cost, in my mind, I would imagine that you should see a similar curve around invoicing, or do I have that wrong?
Yep, right. Because you do want it to track, right? You want to keep pace with your job costs and ensure that you are invoicing. And in fact, one of the things that I hear quite a bit from the accounting department of a lot of contractors is their frustration that their project managers, they might be good at invoicing regularly, but they consistently forget to include the fee, and so therefore really, so the invoicing is always lagging, right? And so I tend to really emphasize ensuring that you view things like overhead and profit as sort of an obligation, or if a project manager can see that as an expense sort of obligation to their own company, and they treat it as such, then they're sort of more apt to ensure that they're including that in their invoice and not neglecting it. But in this case, right, so the black line is in fact the job to date invoice amount. And what we like to see is, right, that black line is outpacing the red line just a little bit. And right where your cursor is, that's a perfect example of how we want it to mirror, right? If we've got job costs and then you add the fee to that, that's how we want it to go, right? So that's the invoicing. It is tracking very well. But what happens when we don't invoice for a month, right? We flatline right there, and that's a concern. So every single one of those flat lines, right where your cursor is, which is September 2020, and then up a bit, we see that again in February, March 2021. We flatline again, and anytime that red line is above the black line is an indication that the contractor is going to be carrying costs and causing additional expense in terms of carrying the cash flow for that project. So let's take a look. Let's see what happens then with the payment cycle. We add this is green line. Now what we see is the green line represents the payments receivables. And so, and what's interesting too, right, is this owner, for the most part, was just basically following the pattern of invoicing, we could see that September invoice that did not go out, and subsequently there wasn't a payment, of course. Then up above that just a little bit in November and December, right, we see a flat line with the owner, and so that's a delay from the owner in paying, and you can see that disparity, or sort of that horizontal gap, if you will. When that horizontal gap gets larger, then that's going to create a financial burden on the contractor. So, all right, real quick recap. When the black line flatlines, that's an indication that your project managers are not consistently invoicing. When the green line widens, that's an indication, widens the gap between the black and the green line. That's an indication that your owner is actually delaying payments. Keep in mind too that we are naturally going to see a little bit of widening because of retainage, right? So if at the beginning we won't see as much disparity, but as the project continues on, we'll see that 10% retainage or 5%, whatever it is. It's going to widen that gap a little bit anyway.
So let me try to put this into a practical sense.
Yep.
Just because I like to think in things that might impact me. If I have a wide gap here between the black line and the green line, that means that someone is carrying that cost, and that someone typically is the construction company, like my company, right? They're the ones, they are the bank on this job. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And some of that, of course, trickles down to the subcontractors because of our pay when paid clause. But really, what happens frequently, because general contractors value that relationship with their subcontractors and understand that a lot of these subs are very small businesses and just don't have the capacity to cash flow, they tend to pay, they go ahead and pay them within 30 days, even if they haven't been paid. And I know a lot of general contractors do that. Maybe they have a benchmark. If the contract is $50,000 or less or something like that, then they go ahead and pay those small contractors, because they just don't have the resources to cash flow, and they've got to keep their, they want to keep their people on site. So yeah.
So what is some best practices around ensuring that something like this does not happen?
Yeah. So there's three things that I like to sort of emphasize, and that's the consistency, the timeliness, and communication. So first, be consistent in your invoicing. Make sure that there is an invoice sent every single month. Be consistent on that. Regardless of how small the project manager thinks, right, that invoice is in relation to the project, right? So for instance, this project, which was $44 million, so, fairly significant project. And so it's easy for a project manager to see, $150,000 invoice as, fairly insignificant. And I don't want to go through all that paperwork for, an invoice that represents, less than 1% of the project. And why go through the rigors? Well, it's more than just that $150,000. And we'll show you in a little bit, sort of the impact there. But consistency is very critical. And we can see that when we're inconsistent, then the owners become inconsistent. So even us thinking, oh, well, it's a small invoice compared to the contract size. We'll just wait till next month. Well, what happens in the mind of the owner is they start to think, oh, well, he didn't invoice, and so so really, that cash flow isn't critical, and so they start getting that sort of wrong message or wrong interpretation of the message. The other thing is timeliness, and this part is critical as well because ultimately we're human, and we get into habits and we get into cycles. The owners, when they receive an invoice, if it's timely and coming in at the same time every single month, then they actually will develop habits and behaviors to respond to that. But when it comes in at different times of the month and our timeliness is sort of is off, then that throws off the pattern for the owner. So really what we're trying to do is train the owners to be timely and consistent as well. And that's critical. And then of course, communication, right? We can't talk enough about that topic, but follow up. Did you receive my invoice? Do you have any questions? Does it meet the standards? When are you coming to the job site? I want to make sure that I'm here for you. Communicate and be, again, consistent and timely on that communication as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of contractors don't think that they can have that conversation. They need to have those conversations with the owners.
That's interesting what you just mentioned. I have two things that I like to add to that. I have typically seen the S-curve plenty of times as it relates to cost. Never have I considered what an erratic line looks like for billings when you don't have that smooth curve like you do with the red line. When it's everywhere, that is based on what I am hearing, that's typically not consistent behavior on the part of the project manager. And I think that's what you're saying. But so it's interesting. If you're a project manager, these are some of the things that you probably should already be aware of. You should know you have to bill every month. You should know that the timeliness is important. And I know things go wrong on a project and you might miss a billing, or like you say, you might feel as though the billing is, insignificant. So if you find yourself missing a billing, I'm curious what the fallout might look like. How does that impact you from a dollar perspective?
Yeah, it's pretty significant. So actually, what we did here is we calculated the cost burden when that happens. So here's a histogram that is superimposed with that same S-curve. And so across the x-axis here, anytime we see the values below that x-axis, that is the dollar amount that costs us in terms of finance charges on our line of credit. So let's say our line of credit is, 4 or 5%, whatever. And again, we anticipate carrying some cost on our line of credit to carry the project. So none of this should come as a surprise to anybody. But what is surprising is how significant, how much it grows when there is that inconsistency or lack of timeliness in the invoicing. So right where you've got your cursor, Bruce, is a perfect example, right? And $7.7 million was our negative cash flow. So that's the dollar amount that we are carrying on this project at that point in time. And notice, right, how fast it escalated from just 2 months prior. Yeah, right there, perfect. right? It went from really $2.5 million to 7 million really quick, and or 7.7, so almost $8 million we're carrying on that line of credit. That gets pretty expensive, and all of that is rooted in just simply not invoicing 1 month.
That's incredible. You're telling me this flat line resulted in what we're seeing here for the month of October, that 7.7, negative 7.7.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So remember, that's the job costs, right, that we're carrying. So now let's take a look. Let's take a look at that, just that histogram on its own. Right. So here it is. But now what I've done is I've calculated the finance charges associated with carrying, right, those costs. So in that month where we were $7.7 million at 5% APR, we're going to carry $32,000 in finance charges alone, right? So that's 5% divided by 12 times the balance that we're carrying for those 30 days. Now, that's a lot of money. I mean, right? And you can see, so every single one of these months here, we're seeing a carrying cost, and it's directly correlated. Every time we see that spike, that's an associated cost with a delay in invoicing or a delay in receivables.
This is really, these are salaries that we're looking at, right? That you're paying for these jobs every month.
Right. That's a monthly. That's a monthly cost, right? So, yeah, that biggest dip, $32,000 in a single month. $24,000 in a single month, and honestly, I would quit my job as a professor and come work for anybody that would pay me that much to help their cash flows. Right. But that's a lot of money. So what does that look like over the course of a project? Well, let's look at it cumulatively, right? And you can see, right, there's that big jump. And we look at it over this, 3-year project. It was a long project, but over the course of that entire project, in our last month, when we finally closed it out, we looked at the cumulative expense. Again, this is just the interest alone on carrying that project, $336,000 on this $44 million project. Now, okay, that's a huge number. Let's look at that in terms of, right, comparing that to our fee structure. And this is what happens, right, when we're proceeding through a project. And this is the danger. This graph right here that you see is basically the erosion, the margin erosion throughout the project. Top left, we see that's the contract value, 44 million. And the fee was estimated at 2.08 million, almost $2.1 million, 4.7% for the fee. And then remember, right, our total cost on that line of credit was $336,000. This is how margin erosion works. It's very gentle slope, right? It's very subtle, and it happens slowly over the length of the project. And what happens is our project managers tend to not focus in on that, and they get to the end of the project, right, and realize, wow, our margins were, or our fee eroded down to 1.75, right? And so that's significantly lower than what we estimated it at 2.1 million.
That That's pretty amazing. I love how you put it. It's something that is subtle, and it starts with maybe, hey, this invoice is insignificant. Let's wait, and we flatline out, not knowing that long term we're creating this habit. Not only, it sounds like what you're saying, it's not only the habit of us relaxing the billing aspect, but we're also training the owner as well around how we operate. So this is really interesting. I just have one question because, it seems like as a project manager, I have a lot of responsibility, but one of my key responsibility typically is let's make sure that our costs don't get out of hand and exceed our budget. So, if I bill late and the company has to bear the cost of carrying that burden, how would I know what that true cost is? I'm a PM. I'm not the financial person that's looking at all of this. So, is there a way that a PM might understand what that burden is?
Yep. We got to get them trained. We need to help them understand, what is really happening behind the scenes in terms of financing this project. So a lot of them are just simply naive. They just really aren't aware this is happening. And then if we're using our line of credit, right, what does that really cost? And so, and then the other thing too is I hear this a lot. Well, we're just using our cash. We don't use a line of credit. We don't use debt to finance project. We use our cash. And that gets me a little bit sick to my stomach, to be honest with you, because when a company's using their cash, that means they don't understand opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is much more expensive than a line of credit. Because if you look at your return on assets, right, your return on assets is probably closer to 10, 12, and some companies that are doing really well, right, their return on assets can be like 15%. Well, I would much rather use my line of credit at 5% than my cash that cost me, 12, 15%. That's significantly higher, because now what I'm doing is I'm using the cash that should be used to grow my business, to expand into new markets, right? To develop into a stronger, right, more capable business. The other thing too that's happening there is this balance for securing bonds, because if we depreciate or if we reduce our liquidity, we're actually damaging our bonding capacity higher than by using that line of credit. If we have higher levels of liquidity, maintain that, our bonding capacity is going to grow faster than it would be diminished by using or leveraging inexpensive debt. So I cringe a little bit when I hear companies talk about using their cash instead of a line of credit. It's inexpensive at this point to use that. So, but getting back kind of to your question there, how do we help them? We train them. We need to make sure that we have some kind of instrument in place to measure, and so I'm advocating, obviously, an instrument like Pronovos, where you can quickly educate and quickly track your movements there for cash flow, and be able to to inform your project managers, hey, this is the trend you're going on, this is what's happening here, this is what's costing us for these negative cash flows, and get them back on track. Right? It's a teaching opportunity, it's a training thing, and we've got to continue to talk about that and so forth. That greasy wheel gets the grease, or the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right?
That's right.
So if we're talking about cash flows and talking about these principles, that's what's right. That's what's going to get the attention.
And, I have to say, this is why we do what we do as it relates to just analytics, construction data. There's so much hidden value in this data. When you have the tools to see stuff like this, you can make change and you can change the trajectory of negative outcomes. And while this is what we do, analytics, I think that, if you are not working with a tool, you should. I mean, something like this literally means that you can, save thousands of dollars within your organization. So
Tens of thousands of dollars.
yeah, tens of thousands of dollars. Exactly. And just still speaking about the accounts receivable, speaking about billings, everyone, I would imagine that a lot of project managers are working with their accounting department to understand what their their AR aging looks like. And so I've had a great opportunity to work with different contractors to try to understand what type of information they're looking at. And so, when you put something like this in the hands of the project manager or the someone in accounting to try to understand, how are we managing our receivables? How can we, not be the bank that, for as long as we have to be? Something like this will help you drill into those invoices. John mentioned the day sales outstanding. How are you performing month to month? And how are you aligning to the industry average? And I think something like this is crucial. Everyone needs the right tools to increase the bar, right? We always want to get better. And I think that is the message that we have around analytics and the opportunity costs. And, with a company like Levelset, they help you get paid. All of this ties together.
Yeah. We've got to get the right tools and get that into the hands of the users. We got to do some training. So real quick, a lot of people will ask, Bruce and I get this question a lot. How do I get started? Where do I get started? So this is just kind of a recap here. First, assess your current practice. What are your project managers currently doing in order to manage cash flows? What tools are they using? So assess where you're at. And are you using a company cash or lines of credit? So figure that out, find out where you're at, and then calculate your cash flows. Get a tool, start getting it figured out. You can do it in Excel, but I guarantee you're going to spend a lot more time in Excel. But whatever tool you use, just get it in there and figure out what that negative cash flow is costing you. And then establish some kind of standard and create a managerial strategy, when to use cash, when to use your line of credit, right? And talk about that with the necessary decision makers, and then make sure your project managers are using and reporting that tool that you use, right? And that you're creating some consistency. What I have found is the companies that are consistently and timely sitting down with their project managers to hold them accountable, they begin to follow that same pattern. So it starts with you. It starts with the people that are going to be managing and leading your project management. And then finally, right, sort of the end of that cycle, use that report to measure your progress, provide your feedback to your team, and then start that iterative process over again and continue to refine it and use that to improve. So I have found that contractors that begin this process, right, see significant changes in the behavior of their project managers, and then they're able to actually incentivize, financially for their project managers, the idea of managing cash flows in an improved manner. So,
Yeah,
well, we're almost out of time. We got about 10 or 11 minutes. I'd love to hear if we've got any questions, Michael, or from the audience.
It looks like we don't have any posted questions as of now. So let's give the audience a minute or two to see if they have any questions. But guys, this was fascinating. It's great to see that visualization of in real time. So it was super valuable to me. But let's give a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions. And while we're waiting on those, I just want to tell the audience that the webinar is recorded. It'll be up on LevelSet's YouTube channel, and we should be sending you guys a copy of the presentation as well. And here's our email addresses if you have any additional questions after we end the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, I I would love to continue to learn more about what you're doing to help contractors to get paid on time and so forth, and move that forward, because that's a significant issue in our industry, right? Is that receivables, and poor cash flow is the number one reason for contractor failure. I mean, we saw that in the last recession. Coming out of the recession, we were into the recovery period, and we still saw significant financial failures, and most of it is really due to cash flow. Not it's not due to incompetence and everything. I mean, most contractors are just solid. They're in the business because they know the business. They know how to make the money. We struggle with just collecting the money.
Yeah. One thing that really stood out to me, and when you were talking about the opportunity cost of using, financing your projects off of your own balance sheet, is when you use the example of how detrimental that can be for bonding purposes. Because it's, you hear the common thread of poor cash flow in construction. Well, don't take out debt, don't use lines of credit, don't do these things because you don't want to further yourself into a cash flow crunch. But to your point, there's definitely a balance, because you need to be stable enough, essentially have a rainy day fund, or even just have funds on your balance sheet available to get future financing or weather a storm. If there is an extended period of time, if you're using all your cash on hand, it's going to be very difficult to then get financing in the future to get out of cash flow crunches. And so it's somewhat of a chicken and the egg process that I see often, where someone really needs financing, but it's very difficult to get financing because they have no cash on hand. So any traditional lender or banker is going to look and say, well, there's not enough strength on the balance sheet to be able to provide that financing, furthering the stresses and pain. So I thought that was a really interesting point that you made, kind of debunking the myth of all debt or all credit extended is bad, because that's just not the case. And in a way, it makes you more financially sound by taking on debt, which is somewhat counterintuitive to a lot of people in the industry.
It is. I mean, we just naturally, even in our personal lives, right, we're very concerned about that. But in business, we leverage debt, right? And we do that with our equipment. Right, we purchase equipment for the sole purpose because that equipment generates revenue. Well, so why would you deplete your equipment, right, which is essentially going to deplete your ability to generate revenue? Well, look at your other assets in the same light. Don't depreciate those assets or deplete those assets, because now you're depleting your ability to generate more revenue. And contractors are more efficient at generating revenue with their assets, right, than the expense of short-term debt.
Yeah.
And I talked about that strategy and that cycle there, that strategy making there. Include your sureties in that decision-making process. Bring them in and say, okay, we've just landed this nice, big project, and here's where our financial statements are. You have them. We're considering trying to strike a balance between how much cash we use and how much short-term debt we take on, or use the line of credit. And go ahead, get their feedback. Some sureties are more risk averse in terms of debt, and some sureties are more risk averse in terms of your equity structure. So, so why not have that conversation? Why not include them? And the reality is, I guarantee you, that's going to gain good faith with those sureties. They're probably more willing to take on risk if they're included in that strategy, in that discussion.
Yeah. That kind of ties into something that we recommend to all of our partners, and we work with a lot of smaller contractors, subcontractors who aren't even in the world of speaking with sureties. They may be doing residential to owner projects, but a big piece of that is just transparency and showing yourself and making sure that you're transparent with all the stakeholders on a project. That's something that's very important in our process. What are some tips that you could maybe provide to someone that's just getting started in the industry, or a smaller subcontractor that may not be at the point of looking at the opportunity costs of using balance sheet funds or taking out lines of credit? But I want to know what similar principles apply to a smaller subcontractor, smaller contractor, someone that's just getting started in the business.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And typically what I suggest is that smaller contractors should incentivize quick payments. We have our material suppliers do it all the time, right? We get that invoice and it says up on the top right, it says, 2% discount, if paid within 10 days, the net is due 30, right? Why not incentivize early payments for your general contractors? If you're carrying your line of credit at 5% just to cash flow your own, small business needs, why not give the general contractor a point or two back on their on that invoice, a discount on their invoice if they pay you within 10, 15 days instead of pay when paid. And right, so you come out ahead because you're not carrying that debt, and they come out ahead because, right, they get a discount. And honestly, if a contractor understands what the value of that discount is, they'll take it every day of the week, right?
Interesting.
So that's one strategy, is incentivize early payment.
We have a question. We have a question from John. Is there a particular subcontractor trade that's most vulnerable to poor cash flow? And I may take this. I have a guess, but John, I'd be interested to hear your feedback as well. What I see a lot in working with subcontractors is those that have very high upfront material and labor costs early in the job typically can face cash flow crunches. Let's say if it's cement work or roofing work, or even I've seen in solar, where you have these huge upfront material and equipment and labor costs, and often those get dragged out for a long period of time, which, in those cases, it does make sense to take advantage of some different financing options for that, for those supplies. But I'd be interested to hear your take as well.
Well, I agree with you. Anybody that's carrying heavy material costs up front, structural steel erectors, the reality is the reason why structural steel erectors get paid so well and their margins are so good is because they're taking on a high level of risk. And if you think about them performing, 15 to 25% of the full scope of the work, right? And it's early on in the project. You think about that S curve, and you think about the impact of pay when paid and retainage costs. Those structural steel guys and those concrete guys are investing quite a bit of money up front, and then they have to wait for the full completion of the project before they basically get their profits. Well, they're going to build in a lot more risk management, right? They're going to build a lot more of that sort of contingency into their own bids as a result, because they have to, right, offset the risk associated with slow payments, retainage, pay when paid, that kind of thing. So so it's not just small contractors that are vulnerable. It's big contractors are as well. Interestingly enough, just two and a half years ago, the second largest construction firm in the UK folded up, and it's because they just didn't have the sufficient cash flow. I mean, they were massive. They were bigger than Kiewit, and yet they had to fold up, and the government came in and intervened, and it was poor cash flow. But that doesn't make it easier for small businesses, right? And when we depend on small businesses, so we need to shore them up as best we can. I mean, so it is a relationship that has to be strong. So communicate well, be consistent, be timely.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, John, Bruce, this was great. I really appreciate the time. Again, if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can email us directly, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And thanks again.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks for inviting us. This was great.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.